There we are. Welcome to whoever is watching this. I'm guessing Trump, it's just going to be Donald Trump who watches this, and he'll see that our ratings are really sad and poor. So I thought this week we'd talk about Donald Trump and populism more generally. Donald's visiting the UK for a state visit, which is a visit to the United Kingdom hosted by Her Majesty the Queen, and is for head of state. Only 3 presidents in history have been given a state visit, or at least in Queen Elizabeth's reign. And Donald Trump was invited over within a week of him being elected. So quite what he did to deserve that, we still don't know. And he's had 3 days over here, culminating with his attendance at the 75th anniversary of the of D-Day landings. There's been huge protests in Trafalgar Square. Lots of booing whenever they walk out down Street. But it's quite interesting seeing the American manipulation of the media. He has, I mean, I have to say Donald Trump has given his most impressive performance these last 3 days than he ever has. Mostly because he's only reading, he's staying in line, he's not trying to make it about himself. So he's not like pushing in front of the Queen and beaming at cameras and things. And when you add in the pomp and ceremony and all that sort of thing, you can see why he's keen to get good coverage of it, because he does look like a normal leader. He does come across, during the state visit as dignified and a good representative of America, because it's framed by people who've been doing this for hundreds of years. I mean, one thing I've just seen was Ivanka Trump and a politician called, or I don't know, some White House person called John Bolton, and they walked out of 10 Downing Street. The crowds on Downing Street is quite long, but the end that goes on Whitehall is barriered off. But obviously, there's usually loads of protesters around there, and Whitehall's chocker with protesters. And as soon as they saw Ivanka, they all started booing. But the Fox News feed said, "Oh, they're not booing for Ivanka; they're booing for John Bolton, because in the UK, John Bolton's seen as a really hard guy." And John Bolton, he loves that image of himself, as if people were protesting, going, "Oh no, oh there's that John Bolton guy walking with the love of our life, Ivanka Trump. But oh, he's so hard. He's such a tough guy. Let's boo him. Boo! You're just too tough a negotiator," or whatever it is he does. Nobody in the UK has heard of him. Nobody knows what he does. But the Fox News press literally just lied on a news program.
It's like the journalistic equivalent of going, "Look, behind you, a balloon."
Well, it's like the incident. All it reminds me of is during the Second Iraq War. The Iraqis had a minister of information, and he was known as Comical Ali, because he'd give interviews and he'd be like, they would say, "Oh, the tanks are rolling in behind you on the camera." And he'd go like, "What war are you watching? We're about to win. We're just dotting the T's and crossing the I's on the surrender. Our people are at the White House." Delusional levels of propaganda. And you think, gosh, that would be so obvious. It's Fox. The people watching Fox News are so biased against, in favor of Donald Trump, that they prefer to hear something that is totally without. There's no need for it. The lie. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't do anything. except for reinforce a lie in somebody else's head. But it's not like anything turns on it. The fact that protesters are protesting Trump on Whitehall, in fact booing Ivanka Trump, who they've heard of, knows what she looks like. But they want to deflect it. Oh, it's not Ivanka Trump. It's this guy called John Bolton. And it made me, and a lot in this, because Donald Trump goes like, "Oh, I've not seen any protests. I've not seen any protests," and he has. He's seen these huge protests. Granted, they've all been up Trafalgar Square way and on Whitehall. And for the benefit of non-British viewers, Buckingham Palace is here. There's a long red road called the Mall, which you'd have heard of. That goes all the way to Trafalgar Square. What they've been doing is not going round Trafalgar Square to get onto Whitehall, and Downing Street's on Whitehall, and at the end of Whitehall from Trafalgar Square is you can go around St James's Park and go in through Downing Street that way. And of course, Trump's been isolated from a lot of the protesters because they're all in Trafalgar Square. And there have been American, tourists waving American flags and all that sort of thing. The protesters have all been very, very keen to kind of point out we're friends with America. We just don't like Trump. All the criticism is about Trumpian politics and Donald Trump, the things he said and done. It's not America's this imperialist bully boy or anything like that. It is all anti-Trump. It's not anti-American, which there's been in the past. We've done that with the and some of the justifications that have been some of the apologists, some questions about, well, you let the Saudis come here, you let the Chinese come here, and and of course they are all protested, all of these people, but we tend to hold American presidents to a slightly higher standard.
I mean, it's a way of derailing people anyway. Piers Morgan famously asked Owen Jones where he was when the Saudis came over, and Owen Jones was like, "I was leading the protest," and Piers Morgan was like, "Okay, moving on." There was no acknowledgement that trick completely backfired or anything like that. It's kind of like when people criticize vegetarians and go, "Where do you stop?" Maybe what if plants have feelings? They don't think that plants have feelings. It's a way of just evading criticism on a technicality kind of.
Yeah, I have to say, what's his face? Piers Morgan is he's one of the 47 people that Donald Trump follows on Twitter. Is Piers Morgan. Anyway, Piers Morgan interviewed Donald Trump, and I don't know if it was the last couple of days for Good Morning Britain TV, and he said, you tweeted out your support for LGBT people around the world. How can you do that when you've banned trans people from serving in the military? And Donald Trump starts going, "Oh well, it's the drugs. They need to take a lot of drugs, and it means you break a lot of rules and regulations, and we can't have that." There's a standard. And Piers Morgan comes back with, "Well, you spend a lot on the military in America, and you spend far more on things like Viagra for soldiers than you ever will on pills." It was quite interesting because it was the types of questions you would want asked of.
Did soldiers get Viagra?
Apparently, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Quite how Piers Morgan knows about this. I
reconsider my career options, maybe.
Well, in the States, it probably costs you £10,000 or so. Well, $10,000 for Viagra, doesn't it?
Probably.
But yeah, it's but it was quite interesting. Anyway, so the thing that makes me wonder about Trump and populism in general, because you've got people like Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson over here who are quite popular and will jump on populist bandwagons. And the thing, do you know the definition of populism in terms of a workable definition?
No, is there one?
Well, I mean, there undoubtedly is one, but I always take it to be it's the doing the things that it's not just doing things that are popular. It's doing the things that are popular, regardless of whether or not they're right. You're doing it because they're popular in order to get votes. I think that's a reasonable definition. I'll just have a quick look on Tinternet.
I just Googled it. It's a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. It's a good working definition.
That's yes, in strives to appeal to ordinary people. I think that's a very noble definition of populism, because it tends to be the largest extreme, most extreme group that you go after.
Right, but I mean, for instance, take Donald Trump's populism. Like, he has set up the ordinary people. He's made it. He sort of defined ordinary people as like reactionary old racists, and he's defined the elites as like your atheist college professor, who's like transgender, communist. Like these, in that world, the elites are these like kind of caricatures. So I think that populism is kind of, I would be okay with treating it as like empty of content. It's like it's kind of empty until you start like putting some flesh on some abstract bones.
Yeah, because I don't think it's not always negative. I mean, I'd have whatever view, what it is in a democracy, whatever you want to do, however right it is, it needs to pass the test of popularity. You can't do things that have huge vocal disapproval for it.
I mean, sometimes you can. I mean, like the airport security stuff after 9/11 and like surveillance laws. I mean, they all seem pretty unpopular, but like we're just somehow stuck with them.
Well, I think they're unpopular to a certain extent, but they're understandable. I think, the fact that a few 100,000 or even a couple of million people test against something like that, it doesn't signify huge unpopularity. A lot of this in airports, it's just theatre to make people feel safe. It doesn't do anything. The bombers still get through. Undesirables still get through. It helps people feel safer and move them on. I think that my point with all of this is that the people who populists appeal to can't be so stupid and can't be so unreasonable that they don't see the potholes in it. The huge gaping potholes in these positions. My suspicion is that because it's got worse and worse, it is a what's the word, pushback against what I've found is that in a lot of liberal discourse, a lot of left, I mean, I don't even call it left, it's moderate discourse. There seems to be a reluctance to convince other people now. So it's far more, well, you either agree with this or you're an idiot. You either know that, I'm not even going to discuss it. You either agree with this or you're an idiot. Quite like the veganism school of convincing other people.
I mean, oddly enough, yesterday I was in an argument where it was about like trans people in sports, and eventually it came down to, I think you think that trans women aren't really women. And then they finally went, yes, that's why it is. And I said, why do you think that? And they went, I'm not here to debate that. Okay. So it's like, that's supposed to be me who's like dogmatic and says, oh, I'm not here to revise my opinion, right? I'm not here to, I don't owe you a debate, right? But like now I'm the, if you will, like some kind of trans advocate in this context. And this person is like your cis straight white guy who's saying, I'm not here to debate. Like, so I think like that it's kind of a caricature. I mean, I think it's a caricature of vegans as well. I mean, I'm not a vegan, I'm not a vegetarian, but I know a lot of them, and like it's it's kind of like remember when Richard Dawkins was cool? Like it's kind of like how the critics will just make it about him and his attitude and his tone to just like distract you from the stuff that he's actually saying because they don't have good answers for most of it.
Ad hominem. Yeah. I mean, it's not new. I mean, the character, because people tend, if they argue, I think you're right. They will argue with the character, the version of that person in their head, rather than interact with what the person's actually saying.
Right. And, I mean, people will say like, okay, it's not an ad hominem fallacy because the question I'm discussing is not the strength of the argument; it is him. And I think that at some point you have to be like, you're supposed to discuss ideas, not people, right? So the fallacy is in the question that you want to answer, rather than the argument that you're making. Like the fallacy is the things that you want to bring to people's attention. Okay, Richard Dawkins is insensitive. Well, okay, I mean I don't like the guy, but like back in 2006, he's the only high-profile person talking about secularism and science and all that good stuff.
Yeah, which I'm all for, and I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think that because another one that I've seen a lot of is the kind of whataboutism, whataboutery kind of fallacy, and you do think, and this is where the kind of the elitist in our lot does come out. It's the poking holes in what people are trying to say, which is, because they're expressing how they feel about something, and nobody likes having their opinions challenged when they've so attached it to their feelings, when they've so attached it to their sense of who they are. And a lot of these people have never been in a situation where their opinions have been challenged, in a non-threatening way of their opinions. People say university shouldn't be a safe space and all that sort of thing. It should be a safe space in the sense of you should be able to have your opinions attacked in an intellectually and emotionally safe way. So, so people get used to having their opinions challenged and used to, no, you're not right, and here's why. Here's some models for how you can test the truth of your beliefs, or how defensible your opinion is. But of course, all on both sides, there's people who are literally just shouting statements at each other. They're not engaging. If you don't agree, you're stupid. If you don't, and it's these types of things, because I mean, I saw some, like doing videos on atheism. There'd be people who you just think, wow, you're going way too far in terms of like what you're saying to your interlocutor, and the basis for why you think what you're saying is true. There's this snobbery of like, what, I agree with your conclusion, but your reasoning is appalling.
You think that it's snobbery to pick holes in bad arguments for correct conclusions? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that's fine. It's snobbery when you say somebody's opinion is worthless because they haven't arrived at it in the correct way. You know, they've heard Richard Dawkins say something, and then they just spit it out. They just, you know, it's like with American Dad, and he said, "Oh, we're going to cut out all the gay jokes," because what was happening? You know, they were doing, you know, post-Pride gay jokes. We're all in on it, aren't we? And people are using it in playgrounds, not appreciating the irony, and saying these things just because they've, you know, it made them laugh and they think it's funny. And I think that a lot of people who are attracted to people like Trump and Farage and Brexit, it's their way of saying, this is what, look how right we are now. You know, we're the ones who are right now because we've won this vote. And as I say, it's got nothing, winning a vote, it's got nothing to do with right and wrong. But I think it's the backlash against the same sorts of certainty on, you know, in the centre and in the left against the right, where it's, no, this is always bad. No, this is always wrong. I'm not going to debate it. I don't owe anybody a debate. Here's my opinions, follow me or don't. You know, and the problem with populism that you try, you know, getting a load of liberal people to all to all back the same candidate or to all back the same idea is herding cats. You get people on the right to do it, it's just like, oh, yeah, brown people are a bit bad, aren't they? Oh, yeah. You know, and they can all find something to unify around. Whereas, you know, people on our side tend to pick holes in each other's, you know, there's not many common denominators. It's with lots of thinkers. You know, so my question is, do you think there's a way of us breaking through that? You know, a way of educating them? I don't know. Or is that the way to deal with it? Or is it to try and find something for the left, centre, whatever, the non-right, to unify around?
So I have had people come through my life where I tried to talk to them, and kind of like a while after I sort of like hung up my atheist hat, my atheist fedora, next to my replica samurai sword. Okay, that's all. I'm sort of intellectually satisfied. You know, I got my degree in philosophy and whatever. I was attending this philosophy club and had some Christian evangelists come in, and I was like, oh wow, these people are full of shit. And you know, stayed silent for a long time until I was, okay, someone needs to like. It's like the worst, most right wing apologetics. And what I found was that like the Christian apologetics and just the really severe conservatism. So, you know, fiscal conservatism, anti-abortion, you know, but then like the militarism and like just the jingoism, it's all part of the package, and you can't really challenge part of it without challenging the rest of it. And so, I mean, the whataboutism, what I found is that it kind of goes both ways. So, for instance, if you take two sort of talking points, so let's say guns and abortion, right? What you often get is that people in the center and on the left, and people on the right, there's this kind of symmetry. So you get, okay, you're the left winger, right? I'm the right winger. I say to you, you purport to care about guns and the safety of children in schools, but what about abortion, right? The problem with that kind of reason is that you can flip the script and just say, you purport to care about these fetuses, what about the guns, right? And so we're kind of trying to pick holes at each other, but the inconsistency only comes out of projection, right? Because on the one hand, the person on the left does not think that the fetus is a moral agent or even a moral patient, and on the other hand, the right winger is generally so committed to the like their interpretation of the Second Amendment. That's just a moot point. How many kids get killed? It's just it's freedom, right? So what you need is not to pick try and find these like global inconsistencies, but just to find ways of be a bit more specific. Don't go for the easy. So that's one thing that I realize is that like that kind of. I mean, I will make these arguments even though they're kind of fallacious, which is like I'm interested in. So if someone's telling me that they've got this long list of policies which I think are dreadful, but they just happen to care about the fetus, I'm gonna go no. But that's kind of like that's for me, right? That's like a time-saving device for me. That's not how I'm gonna get out and persuade people. I know that these right wingers, the elites don't care about the senators don't care about the fetus, right? I think probably the right wing voters do. Like they many of them have told me if you support this, you're like a German citizen who sort of like passively supported Hitler in during World War II. Okay, that's what you think. But what I need to do there is talk about the science and the philosophy behind what's going on in the fetus, rather than say something like a woman's body is her choice, because I don't think that I don't think that's like dialectically any good.
The issue you're skirting around is that there's many issues with debating with these people because a lot of them aren't interested in changing their minds, and two, aren't great at processing information. So, what they've got is a conclusion that they're trying to justify, rather than arguing about premises and reasoning. Because that's these are people who are I've heard some of them say, I'll agree with whatever Trump says. I don't care how bad it is. I don't care what happens. All I care about is pissing off liberals. That's all I care about, and it's that kind of thing. And I think it is the backlash of these people going to a doctor and the doctor saying you're fat. It's how do I don't like it. I don't like me feeling stupid. I don't like it. And so what they do is go, well, let's all be stupid together. And Trump comes along and he's just presents as this empty vessel that they can all put, he can say things and they can hear whatever they want to hear. And all he does is turn around and go, I'm doing this for the people. I'm doing this for, what the people want and what my supporters want. You say to him, you're not governing for all Americans, and he's like, I don't care. And it's sort of, on the side, it's like, what do you mean you don't care? That's outrageous. What? And you just think like, oh my God, we're framing these arguments on the assumption that these people care about good governance. They care about making people's lives better. When you have somebody who's just like, I'm here for a good time, not a long time, and goes on the state visits and loves the military parades and feeling important and things like this, and there's people waving flags and clapping him at home, and it's just, how do you wake these people up to say, because you can bet anything, when things turn bad because of all of these policies, the fact in Britain we've had no real governance for 3 years, there's going to be consequences. Factories are closing down, people are losing their jobs. President Trump stood up yesterday with Theresa May and said, yeah, the NHS has got to be on the table if you want a trade deal with us. And that should be the warning bell for everyone that says, actually, we probably don't want to go into trade negotiations with a country the size of America, because it will be asymmetrical, it'll be naturally abusive. And by that, I mean any asymmetrical negotiation is an abusive relationship. Now's the time to think again, But I just know all the Brexit. No, it's scaremongering, fearmongering, and it's like you've literally got the president of America telling you he wants to carve up the NHS, and that will be on the table in any negotiation for the trade deal, and they'll still say, "Oh, that's project here," you know. And it's just that thing of like you can't go in with reason to people who've given it up, who's, you know, they get to feel I'm right.
I mean, maybe part of the issue is that, like, I mean, a lot of the time, I saw people saying, well, I don't really care that I acknowledge that he's wrong in about several facts. I acknowledge that he's wrong in all of these various ways, but he's got his finger on something bigger and more important to me. And I think for a lot of evangelicals, that was abortion. For a lot of people, less evangelical, that was like owning the libs, so to speak. And you know, I think maybe there's like several strands of Trump supporters who are not, you know, identical in their concerns. You know, because even I think evangelical Christianity is kind of, despite all this, is kind of going out. You know, most people just don't care enough to be like a fundamentalist Christian anymore. But a lot of people like that kind of, they like the severity of the worldview, I think, and they like the libertarian politics, you know. And I think that there might be that too, you know. I mean, you know, Margaret Thatcher said that there's no such thing as society, so she's very reductionist. She doesn't believe in like these higher order objects. It's all just like people running around, and society is just this fiction, and she doesn't give a shit about it. And I think a lot of, you know, that's like a good statement of libertarian politics, is like wrong too. It's like useful to have that because it's like so obviously wrong.
Well, I think in terms of what Thatcher was saying in terms of there is no society, is there's no easily discernible will of society. So, and in that sense, you say, well, you know, what are societal goods? You can get into a very long conversation with very boring people, and always find room to kind of say, oh, but are we sure? And all that sort of thing. So I think she said that in a way of destabilizing arguments about societal goods.
I mean, there's no, you know, there's no like clear agreement on like when philosophy bleeds over into science, or when science bleeds over into pseudoscience. There's also no clear way to distinguish between like philosophy that's useful and philosophy that's like excessively speculative. You know, and like people have tried to give that distinction, but it's never really been successful. You know, like no one's ever managed to pin down where philosophy is like useless, you know, academies, and when it's actually like important in people's lives. You know, and I think that like Plato and Aristotle like bleed over into our thinking in ways that we don't understand, but that's so hard to demonstrate, you know. And like you get a lot of kind of down to earth people who think that it's all a waste of time, and they think that the humanities is a waste of time. So yeah, like the argument of like, you know, there's no such thing as society is a classic case of like, well, you know, on some interpretations it's false, on some interpretations it's trivial. But either way, I'm going to use it to push through these nefarious policies.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. I don't think it's a statement of true. I hate to use the word true belief, but I don't think she believed there was no society. I think it's just a method of obfuscation, but also highlighting the fact that, you know, what can we do to? I mean, she famously slammed down a book, and I can't remember who it was by, and she said, you know, this is what we believe, and it was kind of the free market. Everything should be allowed that isn't harmful.
It was probably Hayek.
Salma Hayek?
Not Salma Hayek. The Economist.
Let me see if I can find. There we go. This is what we leave. Thatcher, Hayek, and Friedman. The Constitution
Friedman.
of Liberty.
Okay.
Yeah. A Constitution of Liberty is notably been held up at a British Conservative policy meeting and banged on the table by Margaret Thatcher, who reportedly interrupted a presentation to indicate, in reference to the book, that this is what we believe. The Constitution of Liberty.
I think that makes it makes her a lot more principled than someone like David Cameron, for instance, who just like pins up a bunch of like posters which say, refuse benefits for those who don't work. Like there's no belief behind that. There's no like real conviction that it can't be like that.
Populist. That's what I call populist.
Right.
Because it's people who kind of believe something. There's nothing behind it. There's no knowledge behind it. It's a prejudice. And he's like, feed into that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that kind of politics which is so cynical, but so many people go for it. And the problem I have is you're kind of sat there going, well, what do we do about this? We can't counter it with numbers because you simply can't organize reasonable people for somebody's political benefit, because that's essentially what you're always doing. Politicians, politicians are in it for themselves, and if you can hitch your star to that wagon so that you get something out of it as well. The thing with Trump and the thing with Brexit is literally nobody's benefiting, in these masses. Yeah, there's the disaster capitalists like Jacob Rees-Mogg who will benefit from, raking over the ashes. But typical people in the street, their jobs are at a higher risk, the value of their money will decrease, the value of their pensions will decrease. And yet they're still going for it. And I think it can't just be for stupid reasons like, well, I get to upset my grandchildren. And because I don't like the way smart people talk to me. I want to feel like I've got the answers.
I wonder why after David Cameron won, he ever had any, I was like, in 2010 when David Cameron won, I was thinking, this can't go on because people will just realize how much this sucks. It sucks. They'll realize it sooner or later. And like, here we are in 2019 and it's still like, no, it's fine. The problem is that we're part of the European Union. Like, that's what totally logical. And to answer your question, like, what do we do? Like, I have no idea. I mean, I'll argue with anyone that I can, and if I know, like, sometimes I don't even have I'm no for instance, I was arguing with someone about like transgender issues yesterday, which I'm no expert on, but like I can ask certain questions and like kind of and like if I'm like, I don't have all the answers, I'm not gonna say like, no, actually gender is this, and like your typical, I don't know, left-wing person. I think that if you come at it with your own questions, and like you'll have an easier time because people will realize that they're not dealing with someone who's recycling a set of talking points, but someone who's actually thinking. I mean, that's always my hope. But in this case, I was not successful because it was an article about how someone, trans people are ruining sports because some male to female transitioning people competed as females and won and ran away with it. And my response was, well, it's kind of thought experimenty, and when you've got like the violence that trans people suffer, I don't really care about sports. I don't, and the things that are being brought to our attention are also part of an agenda. So I mean, while I want to avoid a speculative discussion about gender, because I mean, I think
look at how corrupt a lot of sports is, how much money is made off of other people's backs in sport, to suddenly pretend it's this noble religious affair where everything has to be as fair as possible, where you kind of like, it's not all nurture that goes on in sports. It's not all training as to why people like Usain Bolt. We want to see excellence. The spectator wants to see, are these people genuinely excellent? But it isn't something that's worth excluding people because of. But it's these types of things where we say, like, we're trying to make a really complicated moral judgment about, balancing the purity of sports for people who sports is everything for them, or, whatever, against applying a principle of equality. Says, we shouldn't try and excluding people never works, is never good. And sports is a great way of achieving, just as the arts are, a great way of achieving progress for people, and balancing that. And of course, when you think about these things and you examine it and you look at the issues, it's a no-brainer what you should do. For people who just want to watch men's football and have the hint of some sexy ladies and all of these things, all we're doing is spoiling for them. Because they're not thinking about, all they're thinking about, is it fair from my perspective? Is it fair to the other athletes? Is it fair to this female athlete that somebody who's just a bloke in a dress, because he doesn't know anything trans, he doesn't care. All he cares about is, well, this is what I want, this is, this is this, that, and the other. And, in a democracy, where people think they're in a democracy, where people think they live in a meritocracy, where people think the people who are in power there because they somehow deserve to be, the arguments about fairness, Trump, from their personal perspective, Trump, the arguments that you might make about that, if you could walk them through the arguments, they would agree with. And I think the biggest challenge on the centre and on the left is to corral around something that we can, because it is ultimately about us taking back control. We've had control of politics for quite a while because we've had problems that desperately needed solving, and the people who solve problems are the people who are in the centre and the left. They're the people who want to make progress by solving problems for people. Where you haven't got that, or where you spent a lot of money solving a particular problem, like the 2008 crash, the Tories voted to bail out these banks. And that's why there was no money when the Tories came in. They're now saying, oh, well, the disastrous economic situation that Labour left us in. And it's like, no, the capitalist system that we were propping up bankrupt us, just as it always does. Every so often, the head of steam builds, and you have to get rid of it. And yet the Tories are still dining out on it. Even now, they're saying, 9 years ago, when David Cameron was elected in 2010, we inherited this financial situation, and what we had to do was bring in austerity, and that sort of thing. And they still say these things. How anyone is convinced by it? People just, and I think, there is a masochism in people that say, I want things to be as tough. I want things to be tougher for young people now than they were for me, because I think that I had it really, really tough, and they probably didn't.
I mean, maybe they did, but like, why? Suppose that, I mean, it's better to like, have a toothache now than like 100 years ago, right? So, I mean, in some ways, it's easier to be a young person, but then it's like the amount of hours that you need to buy your own house, the amount of hours that you need to work to buy your own house now, are for most people unattainable, right? Makes that unattainable. Whereas, like, you could do that in like the 80s or whatever. You could pay your own way through college. And it's a kind of masochism or sadism, depending on where it's directed.
Well, I think part of it is people, I'm just going to put more, see if I can put more light on. People think, because, and it's what I'm kind of convinced of, is that people seem to believe that they live in a meritocracy, and it makes them feel good if if they own a house, or they have a great job, or they are in a position of power. They believe the only person who's got them there is themselves. It's not a common effort. It isn't, they don't recognize that the schools have been put there by other people, that a lot of research has to happen for you to learn how to do these things, to build the tools that you use in order to excel.
And you need all kinds of advantages, or dare I say privileges, to be the kind of person who gets out of bed every morning and attends school. In a lot of families, like that's harder.
Absolutely. I think the people who are brought up, it can just be in terms of how you're brought up and how you presented an interview. Can be different between classes.
And how well nourished you are, and
yeah, absolutely. There's so much built in, and for people to think they've got to where they are out of pure merit,
or pure like strength of will, I think is also part of it. And so the will is not like it's like this belief in like this like crazy libertarian free will in the metaphysical sense, where it's like even if my mother was a drug addict, I could still choose. It was still up to me. Whereas, I mean, I actually
the children of drug addicts that are telling you this. It's the son of of very rich people who were trying to reassure you that they don't have privilege. It's just they're a better character person who happened to be born in a privileged background. And I think people think that way, and when they realize how terrible their life is, and seemingly nothing they can do to dig themselves out of it, So it's kind of this double think of you're in a terrible situation, but you still think you're doing better than somebody else because of your own efforts. And you're going like, well, why don't they just, why have they tried not being homeless? That kind of reasoning. And they then turn around to these people who are slightly lower than them, and blame them for everything. You're what's dragging me down. You're what's dragging me down. Not looking up, going like, you're what's keeping me down. Or try, all these policies are designed to stop people working together and having empathy for people who are worse off, and realizing, it's either a complete conspiracy that, you're in a meritocracy, but no matter how hard you work, no matter what you do, you never seem to rise up. Or you rise up in such tiny increments, and then they see somebody on benefits or something like that, and you go like, oh my God, I've worked for everything I got. No, you didn't. It's fine.
So like £45 or £50 a week, whatever it is now, is worth being mad at someone about.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it's the classic thing of like, there's a rich person telling a middle class person to blame the poor person, and to a certain degree, it's this thing of keeping everybody just fed enough and just happy enough with their status that they only ever kick down. The improvement in their condition relies on the approval of a superior. And it's that kind of, that's why you don't kick off about things, because you know that your position depends on the pleasure of your superior, but you're in a meritocracy. And it's just like, those two things can't be true. They contradict each other.
Mm-hmm.
If your position depends on the approval of your superior, that requires a system that ain't a meritocracy. You know what I mean? Because it should be like, well, regardless of what what you think, I'm, if my sales figures are this, or my production figures are this, or my hours worked this, I will be promoted once I've stepped through all of these routes. And people, it's this this dissonance that people hold in their heads about these ideas, and the thing, and they'll act on them. I mean, that's what's annoying, because it's just like stupid people clubbing together and destroying the country and destroying the world, and you kind of, what are we supposed to do about this? Because it's all done on majorities. It's all done, you know, with democracies. I mean, we are seeing this lurch to the right, and we're not thinking hard enough about why it's happening. You know, you look at how we deal with Trump. It's always on his terms. You know, it's always, well, he's dragging us to the gutter. Let's go down there and fight. And of course, how are you going to compete with people who've been fighting in the gutter all their lives, for us to go down and just like, oh, I'll criticize Trump and put hashtag sad at the end of it. That'll sort of, you know, it's just like, doesn't work. You know, I mean, speaking of Owen Trump, of course, Adam Bolton's Sky News, let's get Owen on this camera. Here, Owen, do you think we should all be respectful of the president when he visits? Cue another rambling rant from Owen Jones, which was, you know, it's always a good watch, but to me, it's a distraction from what we should be doing.
I mean, if you're in the know, then it's like, yeah, everything he said is correct. I mean, maybe the question is like, maybe the way Owen Jones could have answered. I mean, let me try and be Owen Jones here for a second.
Okay.
Take a step back, right? So what Owen Jones did was he gives like a very, he gives an answer which presupposes a common framework of, okay, Trump is disrespectful to minorities. He talks about grabbing women by the pussy. He talks about, okay, these are all valid criticisms. Maybe what he needed to do was talk about what makes them valid criticism, right? So the answer that you might give would be like, okay, Mr. Interviewer, what reasons might we have to respect president of a visiting country? Well, you know, just like ordinary diplomacy, the US is sort of an important world player, you know, we've always had this special relationship. Now, what kinds of reasons might mitigate or negate those? Well, he fails to adhere to moral standards which we all share, or that we all ought to share. And that's kind of what's implicit in his answer, what he's not saying. He is accelerating a global catastrophe, like, which he did say, but he didn't, you know, maybe that's kind of the way in which you say it, where like, you don't get too passionate, but say, for instance, or maybe there's maybe a flaw with what I'm saying in that, like, okay, you know, how are you supposed to not be? But I mean, sometimes I go up to right wingers and just go like, why do you think that? You know, and it's kind of like they like to present themselves as the Socratic ones, where and often, like we were saying earlier on the left, it's like, oh, you're sea lion in me, right? So it's like, have you seen this?
What?
It's this. I'm gonna send you a link here, and it's like a famous. If you like, it's this cartoon. Maybe you can, and it's like a sea lion appears out of nowhere and starts like arguing with people. And the idea is that like the sea lion is relentless, uses a veneer of reasonableness, but is ultimately only trying to derail people. And that's always like the criticism that feminists give people who criticize them for too long, or in ways that they find. I mean, I try and always, like, even though I'm the left wing guy, try and talk to people in a way that is never going to look like it's sea lioning, but it also is be Socratic without sea lioning people, you know. So maybe the kind of answer that I would have given, if, you know, had they interviewed me, would have been like, well, you know, he doesn't he doesn't adhere to these ordinary moral standards. And there may be sort of like these other reasons to protest, for instance, sort of like solidarity, like this international solidarity, and also solidarity with these minorities who you adhere to these ordinary moral standards that you prioritize over politeness and things like this. So maybe Owen Jones could have been a bit more meta in his approach. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good. That's because I kind of think, well, what would you say to these? I mean, at one point in the interview between Donald Trump and Piers Morgan, when basically Piers Morgan, who, like I say, is a very sympathetic to Trump person, he counts as a personal friend, quickly got down to Trump just going, well, it is what it is. I mean, it's just, you hit kind of rock bottom. But I mean, I do think that, because if you just take something like Make America Great Again, and you kind of think like, well, what does that mean? What is greatness? And you go to, and you think, well, he's quite jingoistic. He wants America to be powerful. He wants America, it's that version of greatness. He doesn't mean artistically great. He doesn't mean culturally great. He doesn't mean scientifically great. I think you can kind of, it's all about the public expression, the external expression of power. And presumably you want that power to be real, not fake. So what can you do in order to do that? And he's done nothing that makes America more powerful. If you go to like Machiavelli and say, what should you be doing? Well, you should try and weaken your enemies and strengthen your allies. That's a way of making yourself more powerful. And he does the opposite. He has enhanced the profile of Korea. He's enhanced the profile of Russia. He's diminished the profile of NATO. He's diminished the profile of Germany. He's diminished the profile of Britain. He's diminished the profile of Europe. All the things where we are natural allies in the sense of, we have people, Americans living here. We have British people living there. We have money investment in America. They have, everything you should be doing. That is how you express power. Is you have influence in all these spheres and all that sort of thing. Whereas he doesn't. People are just like, we don't know how to deal with him. We don't really know what he's going to do next. We don't get treated favorably. It's not about treating everything. So nothing he's doing is making America great again in the way that one might suppose he would want to make America great again. He's weakening America. He's isolating America. And when the future depends on solving certain problems, he's denying that the problems even exist, rather than going, right, how do we solve this problem? Imagine bringing China into reducing their carbon emissions. That would be a huge success for any president to achieve. And he's doing things that will reduce the West's influence in China. He's losing influence to China. You've got people in the West going like, well, I kind of see what China's on about, simply because they're not being led by America. What he's doing is, I think, appealing to what his base thinks are the sources of greatness. And it's just like, what is it you think is going to happen? What's the end game with this war?
I mean, maybe there's like a kind of, one is that it's deliberately meaningless, and that it's, it's a box with nothing inside, and it's a useful piece of rhetoric, because you start asking, well, what do you mean by great? In what respects are we great? Are we not as great as we were in the 1950s when there was segregation, so on and so on? I think what people want is this kind of like return to a kind of rugged individualism where you can tell maybe racist jokes, and you can say, make me a sandwich without feeling sexist or whatever. And there's this kind of fear that the world's getting too sensitive, and it's going to be this like Orwellian police state or something like that. I mean, libertarians like Orwell, and when you talk about how Orwell was a card-carrying socialist, they kind of brush that off weirdly.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing of like, what was great in the past, and all they're thinking about is trying to avoid the stigma of being horrible to other people. You know, why are you trying to stigmatize being selfish? You know, I've got to look out for myself, girl. You know, it's that kind of thing of that impulse to, I've got to look out for myself because nobody else is. You know, and anybody else that gets a hand up is cheating me. I'm losing out because somebody else is benefiting.
Ultimately, what Donald Trump is doing is not in Donald Trump's interests. You know, like to create dysfunction in society and to create, you know, poverty and lack of education and so on. I mean, those families that suffer produce criminals on average higher than they would if they were not under these hardships. You know, so it's like they're ruining the playground for themselves as much as anyone else. You know, because ultimately it's like, okay, I mean, or maybe they think, you know, we can just like, we can save ourselves no matter what happens. You know, we can have like these fenced off communities, we can have armed guards and so on. But ultimately, it's not. You know, one wonders like, why do you want a planet that's hotter for your grandchildren? I mean, presumably Donald Trump cares about his kids. Like, even someone like that is going to be like, you know, little 10-year-old Baron Trump like doesn't want to leave him a planet that's like Venus. But that seems to be like the ultimate result if he gets his way.
I mean, you only have to look at why do we care what certain billionaires think about, you know, we don't care if you're not rich anymore. We need to fix this problem, so we're going to do it. You know, and it just shows the influence of money in politics that we haven't just done that and just said, you know, some problems, growth as the measure of success is irrelevant. We do need to solve this problem, and you can either be part of it or not. Saying to a handful of individuals on the planet, do you mind if we fix it? Because you've done so much damage, and we're complicit. We've allowed it to happen. You know, but we now do need to fix it. So if you can just stand back, the fact we can't do that, the fact that the we doesn't exist, you know, it's them. They're the ones. And it's that kind of thing where, and if you've got a bunch of reassuring scientists employed by billionaires to turn around to somebody as stupid as Trump and say, oh, it's a load of stuff and nonsense, it's just leftists wanting attention so that they can, because they just want to attack and take our money so they can give it to undeserving poor people. And for them to be reassured by it. But you've got to put yourself, like I say, you've got to put yourself in the mindset of people who don't interact with science, who don't interact with facts, who think that facts are mere matters of opinion.
I mean, ultimately, like, I think that, you know, there are three ways to win at these sorts of political struggles. I mean, one is, you know, by persuasion. You know, so we just go door to door and persuade people to vote for Bernie Sanders or Corbyn. So you've got persuasion, you've got, and maybe propaganda is a subspecies of persuasion, or maybe it's its own category. And so instead of like appealing to arguments, you like sort of you make videos of like you know, a polar bear struggling to get safe, and you put some sad piano music behind it and tug at the heartstrings. Say this is, you know, or violence. You know, we storm the Bastille and elect, you know, Bill Nye as, like, you know, declare martial law and make Bill Nye king of America or something kind of far-fetched and silly like that. And so I mean, between you know, persuasion, propaganda, and violence, I think that three is an exhaustive list. And you know, maybe we don't really like where this is going, but like I don't see a fourth alternative there.
I mean, the thing is with you can't pull on people's emotions. I don't think, because we'd all be vegans if you could. The basis of the vegan argument, a lot of the vegan arguments, is look at this cruelty, look at this face, look at this, empathy-driven arguments. And we've had for too long. I mean, you look at the main problem most people have with capitalist political systems is you do very, very well as a total psychopath. You don't, emotions tend to hold you back from being a billionaire. Empathy tends to hold you back from being in that. Having no empathy, being a psychopath or a sociopath, doesn't hinder you at all. You can still be incredibly successful. Dip your hand into the public purse, like Philip Green. Is in talks, because his empire is the Acadia Empire Group is crumbling, and he's now looking around going, who's gonna bail me out? It doesn't affect them. So we've encouraged a society to not really care about things, and this is where everything has driven us to this point. You look at libertarianism in America, it's taken as a almost reasonable position now, as opposed to the extremist kind of, and you look at the same in Britain. People, you've got people attacking people on Twitter for being snowflakes and all this. It's no longer an essential part of the good life, to be to help one another. You're all in this together. We're all just on a ball flying through space. We may as well help each other out. Be a force for good rather than a force for misery. But we're all like, no, we haven't got time to do charity. We haven't got time to look after anybody else but ourselves. So fuck a lot of you. So I don't think that's going to work. I think persuasion. We're all now so divided that it's hard to even. I mean, there's a video online on the TV of this Brexit woman calling Nigel Evans, who's a Brexity member of the ERG in the Conservative Party, who wants a hard Brexit, and she's screaming at him, going, "Yeah, you're a traitor. You're a," she's not interested that they're on exactly the same side. And you can see in Nigel Evans' face of kind of, what have we done here? This country is so divided that one side just doesn't listen to the other anymore. It's more about upsetting the other side. What can I do that has an impact? What can I do that upsets? We're seeing the dissolution of self-interest as a political, informed self-interest as a political thing. Helps us choose our leaders. What's in it for me? Who's going to do what I want? That's make my life better. They're not doing that. They're going, who agrees with me that this group of people are bad? Who's going to publish my opinions? Who's going to make me feel like I'm right? And and that's just silence. I mean,
suppose Trump loses in 2020 to a genuine progressive. I mean, then I think that things are still bad, but could maybe turn them around. I mean, if he wins again, then it's like seems like the situation's getting quite desperate. It's like this. It's kind of like there's kind of like a nihilism behind the people who support him, and it's kind of worrying. Like, it's not like keep me up at night worrying, but it's like in principle, it's like, how do you what do you do? And there's no good answer on offer, really.
I mean, things like, he goes into a religious college and says, "Oh, my favorite bit of the Bible is 2 Corinthians," not the second letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, or Corinthians 2, or whatever he said, which shows that he doesn't read it, doesn't really think about it, not really interested. and they're hailing him as the Messiah. They're calling, he's been put there by God to lead this nation, and you just think, is that all it takes? And you're so for him because he holds the same prejudices as you. You're saying that many people would say are not in the Bible, or there's no authentic religious view on it. It's the views of religious people, and you're happy to just clap along with that.
I mean, education, is something that we talked about in our last stream. But I mean, I think that if you've studied like the lead up to World War II and how Hitler, talked about Jews, for instance, then you don't necessarily have to go, oh my God, Trump's the next Hitler. But when you see him talking about Mexicans being predominantly rapists or whatever, or Mexican immigrants, they're not sending their best people, you look at it and you go, hang on, there's a certain similarity here which is at the very least disturbing. And, we don't really see that. Like, you see it a bit on the left, and then it doesn't have any rhetorical. I think you've convinced me that we're fucked, Darren.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, we're in a situation, and Twitter has been this things like Twitter where we're all now desensitized to people being called Nazis. You've got people with swastikas tattooed on themselves, which would have ended people's relationships, their jobs. They would be humiliated and would not want to be seen with this. The societal shame and stigma attached to basically the thing people like today. You've got Trump talking to D-Day veterans, and you think, who would have fitted that into Nazi Germany? Not in the sense of like, okay, he's picked one side over the other, but he's using the same tactics to create this false sense of superiority in his supporters by blaming all of their woes on people who are different, on the other. And it's that's happening again. And people aren't, you look at people, his base, and you look at the police state that is America now, because it is. I mean, if you're not white, middle class, then the police aren't there to help you
No. And I mean, when I was 22, a few years ago, I first arrived in the States. I was at this party, and we changed houses, and I had a beer in my hand. I was sitting in the passenger seat, and a cop came over and saw me, and if I'd have been black, I'd have probably been dead, but I was white, and he made me pour it out. We went to this other house, and I drank another, 12-pack or whatever. But like, I've experienced white privilege over here, whereas I mean, in the UK, the police seem to be a lot gentler and like a lot less power mad, So I mean, yeah, I agree, and I think definitely it's a police state.
The American experiment failed, and it needs to come back under the wing of Her Majesty, basically. The thing is I think we're all, because America is not I don't believe America, the idea of America, the philosophy of America and all that is best in the hands of somebody, Trump. And the frustration is that how do you deal with this? How do we? And I think that the answer is we've got to find a way of bringing these people along with us, because they're all, and in the UK with Brexit, what we've done is move things forward because we want better lives. We want our problems solved. So we voted for progressives who, okay, have always been self-interested kind of thing. But there was always the public had the stick that was shame. We had the carrot that was praise. And Twitter's blown that out of the water. You can always find a group that praise you endlessly, no matter how evil and horrible you are. And you can find, you can always find that group. You can always join the in group, and you can filter out who you disagree with. And that's, our exposure communities now aren't about, well, look, you're in the same village, or you're in the same neighborhood, or you're in the same town. Shake hands, you've got to get on together because you're living in each other's pockets. And now we don't have to do that. We can find our own, the need to get on, the need to live together and work together is now, well, you can be a total loner, a total crazy psychopath, going to work, doing your hours, coming home, and then going online and connecting with people who think and act and look like you and are angry about the same unfairness, about the same thing as other people. And you've got your community, all of your social boxes that need ticking in your brain for you not to kill yourself, are there. And we need to figure out a way of dealing with that. And we need to figure out a way of talking to each other again and not seeing Trumpers and Brexiteers and people like that as evil. They're motivated by different things, and we need, the problems that we face are real, and the differentiator is that ignoring these problems won't help.
I mean,
when it's right about, go on.
Oh no, it's productive to say argue with people. If you can't persuade them, you can persuade others, right? So I mean, televised. I mean, there used to be this debate thing. I don't know if it was televised, but it was like on YouTube. It was like Intelligence Squared, bit of a cheesy name, but it was like debates about these various issues, and it was kind of like it was public philosophy. I don't know if this thing is, maybe I'll look it up right now, but I thought it was mostly good. Not as progressive as I would like now, but where it's like televised rationality, right? And it's always compressed and made into, but it was like relatively good. And but I mean, I think that if you were to have a forum that actually worked, it would. If you have a forum that works and challenges power, it won't get off the ground. That's the worry.
Yeah, because if you were looking to preserve your position, how would you best do it in the modern era? You'd use the media, you'd use the isolating people down to only what they want to do. The messages, the interpretation of events, the alternative facts that you want them to see. And what people like Fox News have done, like today with the Ivanka thing, is to just say it doesn't matter if you lie. And I think that it doesn't matter if you lie. It does. It only matters if you're popular. That's the popularity is the only thing that delivers power in democracy. End of. What we try and do with good power, is to constrain it. Like in this country, we've got Ofcom, and there's laws around you're not allowed to lie in broadcast media. And in America, they don't have that because it's constraining freedom of the press. All that, and it's just how can you do this? And I mean, other than creating a law that says politicians aren't allowed to be funded by members of the press, anybody, if you own a media outlet or you've got anything to do with the media, you're not allowed to fund politicians to remove their influence from power without constraining. They can still broadcast what they want, but they get nothing for it from political. But I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but it's the link between money and power now almost totally complete. And remember, people have got, they're able to use Twitter and use the media imperfectly. If I was trying to do it, you want to say, well, I don't ever want to get caught lying. But when you've got, people at Fox News and they don't care that they lie, it's not really an issue, because the people watching it are already convinced of the truth of it. It's like going back to Aristotle, people bring their truth with them. You only need to fit in with it. You don't need to change anybody's minds. You've just got to pick out who agrees with them. I mean, it's a very tricky thing to know what to do. And what we're like on the left and in the centre is you pick your people like Bernie and Corbyn, and there's good centrist, leftist arguments against them. Bernie is part of the 1%. He's very rich, so we don't like him. He's a hypocrite. He doesn't talk the talk and all this sort of thing. Both of them protesters, both of them far more comfortable in protesting power than exercising it. Both very passionate, get angry way too easy, not level-headed enough. You need people who are level-headed, and it's always split. Like, so many people in this country don't like Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, but it's because they've been fed so much nonsense about him and they buy into it, not realizing that there's a good reason that he's so well hated is because he actually challenges powerful people. And I think, well, the fact that I think something like that is kind of evidence that I've bought this. I was like, think he's some kind of savior or whatever. I mean, you look back and in the 90s and the 80s of like clips of him, someone who's like, I think, remarkably consistent. And the same with Bernie, who marched with Martin Luther King. And I think that, you had during the 2016 race, this guy, John Lewis, lied and said that Hillary was there and Bernie wasn't. And that lie ought to make you realize that Bernie is someone you should get behind because, the powerful feel the need to slander and lie about him.
And I think there's something in that, in going, assume a corrupt media and then act accordingly. I think my problem with Jeremy Corbyn is that he is just as divisive. And for me, that's the problem with this country at the moment. It's horrifically divided. And somebody who is, the pendulum swung the other way isn't necessarily the thing that's going to bring the country back together. I agree with a lot of things that he wants to do, that he thinks is the right thing to do. His problem is that he's just been around so long. He's got this long list of things that he wants to do. And, there is this thing of like, if you're going to be about, well, I'm always about talking, you can only make peace with your enemies. But he won't talk to Labour MPs who disagree with him. It's that sort of thing where it's just like, oh, it's so frustrating because you're so politically naive. You're so politically cynical that you can't just work with other people. It's that's not listening to each other is the biggest danger. And people who are slice them out and cut off debate. It's what Theresa May did. Which, I mean, she just wouldn't listen to people, wouldn't listen to anybody.
My challenge for you, Darren, is how can you, want to associate with the Lib Dems after they, were sort of like the missing puzzle piece for austerity politics that, has sort of ravaged England. Like, why are you not like outraged at them?
I think if you see people as enablers and blaming them, because you're right, a lot of people hate the Lib Dems more than they hate the Tories, because on the basis that, well, at least with the Tories, you know what you're getting, which to me seems silly. But I think all you can do is say, personalities aside, do I, vote for the people who will put the best methods of solving problems in? So the Lib Dems are sickeningly look for consensus. Their policies all come from votes in the party, and they'll change policies if that's what the vote says. Whether that's a good way of making decisions, I still don't really know. I don't agree with proportional representation. I don't agree with a lot of the policies that are across as kind of answers that can't be questioned. So I'm by no means. I don't care what they say, and I'm pro Lib. They're the most tolerant to dissent. They're the most. They seemingly see, the most. Well, let's talk about it. Oh, we're a broad church. There's that kind of defeatist. Well, we may as well give it a go because we're never going to get in. That kind of thing, which appeals.
No, I can definitely see. I mean, I voted for Nick Clegg in 2010, and there's definitely like the Nick Clegg was far more of an intellectual than Gordon Brown or David Cameron.
Yeah, and I think all you can do is look at what, and he was the first atheist party leader that came out as being like, no, I don't believe it. So there's those types of things where you do feel like this guy's like me, which is a common theme. We all share that. The Trumps believe this. Everybody believes it. I think I'm with David Deutsch in terms of I don't believe we should be talking about policies. We shouldn't be talking about who's in charge. And I think proportional representation and systems like that make it harder to get rid of bad ideas because you get these kingmaker parties, which is what the Lib Dems were in 2010. Most people didn't want the Lib Dems in power, and yet they had a disproportionate say in things. But I think that's just the mechanics of government. I think what you've got to look at is the only way you get things from a Popperian perspective is criticism and conjecture, and whose party system allows the maximum amount of that. Well, it ain't the Tories and it ain't Labour at the moment.
But it's not only important to allow criticism, but to do it. And that's where the Lib Dems seem to have failed in that they gave the Conservatives that majority, but then didn't adequately challenge them anywhere along the line, except for a few irrelevant box ticking cases. One of the things that Nick Clegg was always talking about was like ID cards. Like, no, it's totalitarian. I'll go to jail before I wear an ID card. Yeah. But then you get all this time of austerity, and then now I feel pretty silly for even having that. It feels like more like ideological box ticking than getting at what really matters. And I still think that Labour is more down to earth, and I think that the Lib Dems should acknowledge the fact that they failed to challenge power and failed to do any good criticizing when it was most called for.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think what you observed is they couldn't believe they were in power, and the want to be in power, because what it meant is there were certain things, policies that would never have been enacted, but that they got enacted. Like raising the income tax threshold. Things like that. They squandered certain things doing the AV referendum. Nobody's interest. The only people who benefit are not Labour and not the Tories. So it was never going to happen. People didn't really understand it, and it's about how do you organise yourselves. It's not nobody's going around going, oh my God, I'm so unrepresented, except for people like UKIP and the Lib Dems. So I don't it doesn't solve any problems. It's something they want because
what I posted in the chat. I think this is what the Lib Dems did. They dusted the balls, and they were supposed to cut the balls. I'm sure you've seen this song, but it's
Well, I'll have a look at it.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think you know you're absolutely. The thing is, I always pull away from kind of going the Lib Dems. Everybody should hate the Tories. Everybody should, there's this ideological should hate Conservatives. You should love Labour, no matter what they do or anything like that. And I'm always kind of, well, at the time of the coalition, what was needed was stability, because we'd had this, and Labour couldn't deliver it because they refused to work with other people. I mean, they tried to create what was labelled as the coalition of the losers, because the Tories were the biggest party. But you look at what the DUP have done in partnership with the Tories. They've dug in, they've stood to their convictions, and they wield far more power. And no one will ever blame them for working for the Tories, Whereas what the Lib Dems did was try to make it work. Let's collaborate, let's compromise, let's do what needs to get done, and all that sort of thing, which is interpreted as, well, you enabled them.
Yeah, but it's totally against the espoused philosophy. It's totally against like the economic policies that they espoused. There was this orange book that like an edited book full of essays which Nick had an essay in, and like it's there's like compromising and then there's caving, and when you go against the principles which you are in your manifesto, seems like it's not it's not a compromise. It's just
I think the policies that they said they wanted to do and then did the opposite for. I'm not sure principles were abandoned, because there's always the principle, of changing your mind, always the principle of listening, always the principle of, how can we make something that works? I'm saying this for balance. I'm not saying defending what what any group of politicians do in order to achieve power. I'm saying like things that I would want to see. At the end of the day, you're asking them to exercise the power of the crown over people's lives. So you want a group of people that are going to be keeping each other in check. And one of the nice things about the coalition government is not a lot happened, because they couldn't agree on anything to do. So I suppose that's one blessing, is that it limited the destructive power of the Tories somewhat, which was then unleashed at the next general election. And because the Liberals got blamed for everything bad that the Tories did, and the Tories got the credit for everything good that the coalition government did.
Now, one criticism that you referred to was, at least you know what you're getting with the Tories, right? But there's also a different criticism, which is that a leftist party is supposedly in the know, right? They understand about punching up rather than punching down. They understand about the problems with, for instance, talking about blaming benefits, immigrants, and so on. And so, like, it's a betrayal, because it comes from from someone who's closer to you, right? It's not a betrayal from the Tories, because they always espouse that horrible stuff. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, the thing is, they went to coalition. I mean, so you can't really vote against the government you're part of, because these agreements kind of fall down. I might like what I'm trying to do is to remove this idea of what I want is good government. What does that look like? Sometimes it looks like very strong government, massive majority, do what you want. The Tony Blair era was good government during that time, because it was decisive government. Yeah, there was only one person in charge. There wasn't really much cabinet responsibility or anything like that. But you look at that compared with the Tories now, and it's absolutely terrible government. They're one party and they can't agree on anything. They can't do anything. They're completely crippled because our entire system requires a majority. You look at the coalition, there was far more cabinet joint responsibility but decision. Granted, some of those decisions aren't great for what you would necessarily want all of the time. You might want a part, if you voted Lib Dem, you probably wanted all of their policies to be enacted, but they didn't win, and neither did the Tories. So you got this mix of the two that, if people were principled and said, I won't move an inch or anything like that. But you look at Labour now, and I don't, please don't think that I'm not critical of the Lib Dems and that I think that they're a perfect solution or anything like that. I don't think there is a perfect solution. I think one of the problems with Labour is Jeremy Corbyn's inability to be able to manage dissent in the PLP. So that's an issue. The People's Vote, there was an amendment that was promoting the People's Vote raised by the SNP, and Labour abstained on it. And on Twitter, everyone was like taking screenshots of the vote, and Labour were all sat there abstaining on the People's Vote amendment on the basis that a lobby group called Vote for the People or something had said now's not the time. And you had all these Labour MPs who were supposed to represent and doing the right thing and what's best for Britain. Yeah, even if they'd all voted for this motion, it probably wouldn't have passed. But it would have put it back on the agenda. Instead, it allowed the Tories to say only 85 MPs voted for a public vote. It's dead. So stuff like that, where you're just like, oh my God, your lack of party discipline has caused this type of nonsense. What he should have been able to say is everybody vote for this. But because he's a Brexiteer, because he doesn't like Europe, because it's this capitalist bloc, you've then got, well, what do? We abstain because it's the only thing we can do, because most of us don't agree with it. Half of us do, and not being organised. You can have the best ideals in the world, but the system of government we have requires you to be able to convince other people. And when you're the sort of person who doesn't like being questioned, like his way of interacting with the media is not to talk to it. And it's just, I'm sure for the people who already support him, that's exactly what he should be doing. Well done, Jeremy. Brilliant. Don't mix with the the MSM.
But then the other side of that is you get Owen Jones, right? Where they ask you badly or like dishonestly formulated questions and make tracks for you.
Yeah, you get played by them. Yeah. So the view is you either get played by the media or you don't interact with them. And the other thing is, well, or you can be intelligent, or you cannot go into full rant. Go on shows, be interviewed. There's enough of a range of interviewers that you can pick kind of who you want to talk to. You don't have to go on with Andrew Neil, and get into a ragey argument because you hate Andrew Neil personally. Pick somebody you want to interview, but interact and say, look, this is what I believe. This is what I think. This is what I do. Because what the BBC are currently doing is getting him doorstepped by female interviewers. And what that looks like is, oh, Jeremy, can you answer this question? And Jeremy just totally ignores them or gets angry with them. And that's what it looks like. And it's just, I get you don't like this. I get you think it should be different. But not interacting with it just makes you look like you're above the media, like you don't think it should be there. And that's the way it's spun. And it's that kind of thing that's just, what are you doing? Are you trying to achieve something, or are you trying to win over the media? It's this want of victory over peace. And it's that he doesn't want to make peace and bring everyone along with him. He wants to browbeat. He wants to win. He wants to crush any dissent. He wants, it's that. And of course, momentum's behind him going, yeah, we're winning the argument. Yeah. And you're not winning it by convincing other people of that argument. You're winning it by crushing dissent and bullying MPs out. And things like that. And it's the easiest thing to shit stir in. So you've got people going, all people are talking about, because he's not interacting with the media, just chipping in this, anti-Semitism. Here's a picture of you at a Hamas funeral. Yeah. And then he's completely on the back foot because he has to issue some awkward statement that he doesn't really believe. And it undermines what he's trying to achieve. And you do need a competent politician. You need somebody who's at least knows what the bloody game is, so that they can appeal to somebody other than their niche and their block. Because nobody
hasn't that been the problem that we've been discussing our entire stream, which is just how do you do that, and how do you do that in the face of people talking over you, people derailing you, people asking you unfair questions? So I'm not sure that your criticism is entirely fair, Darren.
Well, I mean, you're entitled to your own opinion. I mean,
sure.
I think I'm thinking in terms of what strategy could he adopt to make him worth voting for.
Well, I think maybe what I said earlier, which is just to deconstruct these questions in a historical way, and I think that he probably wouldn't be allowed to do that sort of thing, where the kind of hypothetical answer I started to give on behalf of Owen Jones, I don't think that news outlets would even let him get those words out.
Hmm.
I'd like to be wrong. You cut out there, Darren. Tell me that again.
He does write for the Observer. I mean, he is the Guardian. He is a journalist himself, so it's not like he can't to do these things. But the problem with so many, the press is quite alienating. But he refuses to go into debates. I mean, I don't see him on many debates and things. And I think if he just put his head above the parapet a bit more and did more TV interviews that weren't just on Transmit, that discussing why do I think socialism is a good thing, because you're hearing a lot about why they think socialism is a bad thing, but you haven't got people going, let's just go back to basics here. What is it that I'm espousing? Let me help you understand what I mean by these things.
I think that the maybe what's holding Labour back from that sort of thing is like I said that Nick Clegg seemed a lot more intelligent than Gordon Brown and David Cameron, but he also looked like a bit of a nerd. He looked aloof, but he looked aloof because he was in some sense getting a bit too obsessed with these minutiae, right? Oh, I've got a manifesto, it's all here, you can read it. No one wants to do that, Gordon Brown came out of there looking like the most authentic person because he resorted to some cheap tricks, but he wasn't like blaming people. He was talking about the common good. Nick Clegg seemed a bit hung up on all this like nerdy stuff,
Look at how look at how healthy it is, and then you had this whole campaign of I agree with Nick, and Lib Dems did well in 2010 because there was this I agree with Nick, because they did this three-party debate, and both Gordon Brown and David Cameron both uttered the phrase I agree with Nick here, kind of thing, the reasonable face of politics. Because when you're having a reasonable debate, and you've got to remember also, Nick Clegg his family's extremely wealthy. He went to a private school, he went to a fancy university, and fits far more in that, debating club, being nice and all that sort of thing. David Cameron, obviously media professional, and Gordon Brown, who had to put up with Tony Blair for 10 years, were able to have this debate, and it was all on Nick Clegg's terms. And now we've moved to shouty kind of again. I mean, it's like, I think the Lib Dems have found it very difficult to fit in with that. and that's probably a problem that they have now. So I don't, I think them as a brand, when it's Lib Dems where Remain, that's something we can understand and people vote for. But it's all about the simplistic message now. It's all about the simple message. And I think Labour have got a long way to go.
You think that there was a time when it wasn't about the simple message?
Very good point. But yeah, no, yeah, I mean, we were able to raise the debate when you're dealing with somebody with a lot of power who is able to be reasoned with, like Tony Blair, who had people, they weren't just going, if people were crassing him, they were the people who he ignored. He didn't ignore the intelligent debate and all that sort of stuff. What we've got with Trump is he won't engage with any intellectual stuff. He only engages with the mudslinging and stuff like that. So we're in the position of where it was very easy to rile Tony Blair and argue about what Tony Blair was talking about. We don't know how to do it with, the distributor. And Jeremy Corbyn's of that kind of, the intellectual socialist who there's people who are beneath his contempt, like conservatives. And like I say, I'm saying these things in the hope that Labour improve and become electable. Because I don't, like I say, there's people who just don't know what, they hear socialism and hear Stalinism or something,
Okay, but what I said to you on our last stream was, when there's a cause that has gaps in it and needs improving, you don't content yourself with criticizing the gaps, but you fill them. So I think that what we need really is like socialism for beginners. A 7-part series by Dazzletag.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you look at because the American view of socialism is that it's something for nothing, and the Russian version of socialism is if you don't work, you don't eat. There's no benefits. Everybody works and everybody earns the benefit of that labor. Whereas, like say, in America, it's a capitalist system where we just give loads of handouts. That's socialism, isn't it? But if you actually look at socialist countries like France or Sweden, I think people would be surprised that they are socialist countries. They imagine them to be capitalist countries.
The libertarian-minded people that I've made these observations to, you've got just a lot of Europe, Sweden, and so on. They'll say, "Oh yeah, but what about the Muslims?" So they'll say things like, "Well, in order for socialism to work, what you need is cultural homogeneity, right?" And you get back to this problem of what the fuck are you talking about? Why are you so racist? Where it's like, we can't have nice things unless we can have white supremacy, and it's just this fundamental problem of these two different frameworks, one of which is commonsensical and one of which is absolutely batshit.
Exactly. And now, as on a stepping basis rather than a sliding scale basis, because what you say is, look, you increase the state interaction with the economy, and you make the country more socialist. Arguably, first thing Labour did when it got power in 1997 was it made the Bank of England independent of government, which is moving the country more capitalist than socialist. So there's how much does the state intervene? So you can make it more socialist on a sort of creeping line scale, and the Tories tried to do it in the opposite direction. Or you can do it as a conscious overnight we're going to start behaving like this, and we're going to start interacting with things in this way. And I think the clarification of what Jeremy Corbyn's actually wanting to do and actually proposing, seems a lot more radical than it actually is. It's not, an overnight we're suddenly far left socialists. So I mean, I do think a lot of clarity is required to create because the thing is, a lot of the questions that are asked of Jeremy Corbyn, the answer would always be of the sort: you've got to understand in this economic structure and in this political structure A, B, C, and D. But he hasn't got time to do that. It's, we're going to buy the railways, people are thinking, well, that sounds really expensive. What? How are we? It's a movement on the balance sheet. It's not a cost. So it requires a lot of understanding to say, like, this is why it's actually affordable, and what you'd actually be doing isn't. It's not. You're not going to have to do much. So it requires a much bigger understanding of what he's trying to do. The problem is people don't have time for that. And because all the Tories have to say is, if I went out and bought a company, I have to have a lot of money to do that. Where's that money going to come from? All your finances don't add up. And that's a very easy thing to say, that people will go, well, yeah, that seems reasonable, that seems understandable. A lot of the things that Jeremy Corbyn want to do are just so difficult to explain to people that, and he's just presumed he's just got where he can't be bothered. And it's because people, like I say, people don't understand the difference between socialism and capitalism. Somebody I follow on Twitter, who's a Lib Dem, answered the criticism. Somebody said, like, well, why not ban capitalism? And he said, oh, because it beats everything else to hell. It beats the hell out of anything else. And it's just like, oh, it really doesn't. It's marginal in terms of, is it a good way to do things? As just and Britain doesn't believe it to the point where we allow utterly free market capitalism.
I mean, I think there's something to be said for the free hand of the market. The Soviet Union had such shortages. People queuing up for hours to get basic necessities like bread, toilet paper, because they couldn't keep up with the demand because it was all centralized. Whereas when it's privatized, and like people just produce what sells and fill those niches themselves.
And because problems being solved at the level of, the benefits of capitalism are, one, you don't have a superior definition of what's good. You can spend your money on what you want. Yeah, you don't have to justify it to anybody. You've got an individualistic view of what is good. And two, problems are solved to the benefit of both parties by interested parties. So the state, who's not really interested in whether or not you like a blue car or green car or anything like that, is solving your problems from its own perspective. Whereas in a customer supplier arrangement, you've got problem solving to something that's mutually beneficial, and people can just kind of get on with it and not worry about it. And values generated on the basis of what do people like and what do people want. And I think that view of capitalism is really, 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 really good, and people understand it. And those are the benefits of capitalism. When you look at wider goods in society, and you say wants are great to deal with in a capitalist mechanism. Needs are something totally different. You know, Crassus apparently used to go round with his, 10 or 20 slaves carrying buckets of water, and they'd go up to people whose houses were on fire and negotiate the price to put out this fire. And of course, the longer that the owner quibbled, the more that the fire would destroy the house. So from a market forces point of view, he had an abusive advantage where he could name his price, and it's those types of things where we go, well, that's not really how you want to be doing it. Negotiation.
Right. You shouldn't be able to like jack up the price of insulin because people need it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, needs are best dealt with not in capital, because it's never a it's always an abusive relationship. It's never an equal a negotiation of equals. When somebody needs something and you're a seller of that thing, you don't need to sell it to them. So their want is always higher than your need to sell it to them, because you're probably selling it to lots of other people. You know, say, well, I'm not going to sell it to you, I'm going to sell it to you. And I think most people would say, well, that's abusive, because it's not, the principle underpinning capitalism is, equality of promise. It's equality of, you do this and I'll do that. And people understand that. That's what they understand, is they say, like, well, we're going to barter over a car that neither of us needs. One of us wants, I want some money, you want some, and all this sort of thing. And when you bleed capitalism over from wants into needs, that's when you start having problems. And we had the what we called the the welfare state, which is now the benefit system. Change its words so it sounds like, oh, they don't need these things, it's wants, and it's the benefits, where
the frivolous luxury.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I want to buy a 50-inch TV. Oh, have some benefits. Whereas it used to be the net through which nobody fell, because there were needs in life, and we acknowledge need a roof over their head. People need mental health. People need physical health. People need, these sort of things. You go like, no ifs, no buts. Those things are better provided by a strong negotiator. You have to get those needs up to provide equality. So you have to look wide with, the NHS, and you say, we're going to build the NHS, and I become a buyer as the NHS. The NHS is a buyer that can negotiate reasonable prices. And that's what the Americans want to destroy, is the buying power of the NHS. If a massive pharmaceutical company is having to negotiate with practices of doctors or hospitals or individual people, that's the advantage. That's the capitalist advantage. That's what they want. Look at this value we're adding. We're alleviating your needs. And it's that sort of thing that, for that reason, just doesn't work. And
should we think of a topic for the next one?
Yeah, sorry. I'm going into,
no worries.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think talking about capitalism versus socialism is, probably a good one. I don't know. What do you want to talk about? Because I picked Trump, which
I don't have any
burning desire to talk about anything. No, I mean, yeah, we can talk about the various isms and how we've inched towards capitalism.
All right, sounds good. Let's go off the air so I can take 5, and then I'll come back.
Okay, then. Well, we'll end it there then, because it's probably quite late. Yeah, it's 10:30 now. So hopefully, if anybody's watching this, please leave a comment with anything that you want us to discuss, because we can happily rant about anything and ramble on.
Did you get any comments on the last one?
Oh, only from people who say, "Oh my god, you're making video."
Okay.
2 comments. So, well, there was one person who disliked it. So I'm really hoping that's inspiring philosophy, whatever he's called. Remember him. But yeah. Anyway, 2.